They were Rome's finest warriors, until the day they turned their swords against the empire itself. In 69 after Christ, a small but fierce people dared to challenge antiquity's greatest war machine. How did a handful of rebels humiliate the legions and nearly change the course of history? Picture this. Somewhere in the misty marshlands of what we now call the Netherlands, elite Germanic warriors who had sworn sacred oaths to Rome were sharpening their blades not for the empire, but against it. These weren't ordinary barbarians at the gates. These were Rome's own chosen ones, the best of the best, trained in Roman tactics, armed with Roman weapons, and led by a man who knew every secret of the imperial war machine. The year 69 after Christ was chaos incarnate for Rome. 4 different men claimed the title of emperor in a single bloody year. While Rome tore itself apart from within, a brilliant military mind saw his moment. His name was Gaius Julius Civilis, and he was about to orchestrate one of the most audacious rebellions in ancient history. But here's what makes this story truly gripping. Civilis wasn't just any rebel leader. He was a Roman officer, a man who had served the empire faithfully for years, who had bled for Rome's glory. So what transforms a loyal soldier into a revolutionary? What drives a man to betray everything he once swore to defend? Honor or revenge? The answer lies in a tale of broken promises, family betrayal, and a small nation's desperate fight for freedom against impossible odds. This is the story of the Batavian Revolt, a saga of treachery, heroism, and brutal tactics that proved even giants have weak spots. Today, on Imperium Chronicles, we're diving deep into this forgotten chapter of ancient warfare. You'll discover how Germanic warriors used flooded battlefields as weapons, how 2 entire Roman legions simply vanished from history, and why this rebellion changed the Roman Empire forever, even in defeat. Don't miss this incredible story. Hit that like button, share this video with fellow history lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more epic episodes from the ancient world. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest adventures through history's most dramatic moments. Now, to understand why this rebellion was so devastating, you need to know who the Batavians really were. These weren't just another Germanic tribe living on Rome's frontier. They were something far more dangerous. Rome's most elite auxiliary forces, warriors so skilled that the empire literally couldn't function without them. Imagine the toughest, most specialized military unit you can think of. Now multiply that by 10. The Batavians were legendary throughout the Roman world for their ability to cross raging rivers in full armor, swimming with their weapons and shields while enemy arrows rained down on them. Roman historians wrote in awe about Batavian cavalry charging across flooding rivers as if they were solid ground. Here's what made them truly unique. While other auxiliary units were recruited from conquered peoples, the Batavians had a special deal with Rome. They paid no taxes whatsoever. Instead, they paid in blood and steel. Every able-bodied Batavian man was expected to serve in Rome's armies, and they served with such distinction that Roman generals would specifically request Batavian units for their most impossible missions. These warriors had fought on Hadrian's Wall in Britain, battled Germanic tribes along the Rhine, and served as the emperor's personal bodyguards. They knew Roman military tactics inside and out because they had helped perfect them. They understood Roman logistics, Roman weaknesses, and Roman command structures better than most Roman officers themselves. But here's the cruel irony that would ultimately destroy this partnership. The very empire they bled for was slowly crushing their homeland. While Batavian warriors died on distant battlefields for Roman glory, Roman tax collectors and bureaucrats were squeezing their families back home. The deal was simple but brutal. Serve Rome without question, and your people can keep their traditional way of life. But increasingly, that traditional life was disappearing under Roman administration. At the center of this growing tension stood one man, Gaius Julius Civilis. His very name tells a story. Gaius Julius marked him as a Roman citizen, probably granted for military service. Civilis was his Batavian name, linking him to his tribal heritage. Here was a man caught between two worlds, a Batavian prince who had risen through Roman ranks to become a respected auxiliary commander. Civilis had served Rome faithfully for decades. He had led Batavian troops in successful campaigns, earned Roman decorations for valor, and even gained the trust of Roman generals. But then came the betrayal that would change everything. Roman authorities, paranoid about Germanic loyalty during a period of civil war, accused Civilis and his brother of treason. The charges were completely fabricated, but that didn't matter. His brother was executed, and Civilis himself was dragged to Rome in chains. Though he was eventually released when the charges couldn't be proven, the damage was done. The man who had given everything to Rome had been treated like a common criminal. His family's honor had been stained, his brother was dead, and his loyalty had been repaid with suspicion and humiliation. So, when civil war erupted in Rome during the year of the 4 emperors, Civilis saw his moment. Here was a man who knew Roman military tactics better than most Romans, who commanded the respect of Rome's most elite warriors, and who now had every reason to want revenge. The stage was set for one of antiquity's most brilliant and brutal rebellions. The year 69 after Christ was absolute madness for Rome. Think about the chaos that would follow if 4 different people simultaneously claimed to be president of the United States, each with their own army. That's essentially what happened to the Roman Empire after Emperor Nero's death the previous year. First came Galba, an old senator who lasted just 7 months before being hacked to pieces in the Roman Forum. Then Otho seized power, only to face immediate rebellion from Vitellius, who commanded the powerful Rhine legions. Otho killed himself after losing a single decisive battle. Meanwhile, in the eastern provinces, the general Vespasian was gathering support for his own bid for the throne. Here's the crucial detail most people miss. While these would-be emperors were butchering each other, the Rhine frontier was left virtually undefended. The very legions that normally kept Germanic tribes in check had marched south to fight in Italy. It was like leaving your front door wide open while arguing with your neighbors. Civilis watched this chaos unfold with the calculating eye of a master strategist. But here's what made him truly dangerous. He didn't just see an opportunity for revenge. He saw a way to disguise his rebellion as loyalty to Rome itself. His plan was absolutely brilliant in its deviousness. Civilis publicly declared that the Batavians supported Vespasian's claim to the throne. On paper, this looked like tribal loyalty during a time of crisis. Roman officials, desperate for any support they could get, welcomed Batavian assistance with open arms. What they didn't realize was that Civilis was using Vespasian's name as cover for his own revolution. Think about the genius of this strategy. If Roman forces tried to stop him, Civilis could claim they were the real traitors, opposing a legitimate emperor. If other Germanic tribes questioned his motives, he could point to Roman endorsement of his actions. It was psychological warfare at its finest, turning Rome's own political chaos against itself. But Civilis knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. He needed a dramatic gesture that would announce to the world that the age of Batavian submission was over. He needed fire and blood. Picture this scene. A moonless night along the Rhine frontier, sometime in late 69 after Christ. Roman auxiliaries are sleeping peacefully in their wooden fortresses, trusting their Batavian allies to stand guard. These men have fought side by side for years. They've shared meals, told stories around campfires, and bled together on distant battlefields. Then, in the darkest hour before dawn, Batavian warriors move like ghosts through the shadows. They know every entrance, every weak point, every guard rotation because they helped design these defenses. Suddenly, flames erupt from multiple buildings simultaneously. Not random fires, but carefully coordinated arson designed for maximum psychological impact. As Roman soldiers stumble from their burning barracks, half-dressed and confused, they find themselves facing their former allies with weapons drawn. The betrayal must have been absolute and horrifying. These weren't anonymous enemies charging out of the forest. These were men they knew by name, warriors they had trusted with their lives. Within hours, multiple Roman strongholds along the Rhine were ablaze. The sight of those fires could be seen for miles, a signal to every Germanic tribe that the impossible had happened. Someone had finally struck back at Rome. It wasn't just military strategy, it was theater on a massive scale, designed to inspire allies and terrify enemies. But Civilis still maintained his fiction of loyalty to Vespasian. When Roman officials demanded explanations, his messengers would arrive with perfectly reasonable excuses. The fires were unfortunate accidents during military exercises. The attacks were defensive measures against Vitellian loyalists who threatened Vespasian's supporters. Always, he painted himself as Rome's faithful servant, even as Roman blood stained his sword. This masterful deception bought him precious time to consolidate power and win over hesitant allies. By the time Roman authorities realized what was really happening, Civilis had transformed a handful of burning fortresses into a full-scale Germanic uprising that would shake the empire to its very foundations. What happened next goes down as one of the most shocking military disasters in Roman history. We're talking about the complete annihilation of not one, but two entire Roman legions. To put this in perspective, Rome had lost individual legions before, but losing two at once was almost unthinkable. Each legion represented 5,000 of Rome's finest soldiers, plus auxiliary troops. We're looking at over 10,000 trained killers who simply vanished from history. The legions in question were the 5th Alaudi and the 15th Primigenia. Now, these weren't rookie units fresh from training. The 5th Alaudi, whose name means the Larks, had been fighting Rome's enemies for over a century. They had served under Julius Caesar himself during the conquest of Gaul. The 15th Primigenia was equally prestigious, a battle-hardened unit with decades of frontier warfare under their belts. But here's what made their destruction so devastating. They were betrayed by the very people they trusted most. These legions had fought alongside Batavian auxiliaries for years. They had shared victory celebrations, mourned fallen comrades together, and developed the kind of military brotherhood that only combat can create. When Civilis called for a meeting to coordinate their supposed support for Vespasian, the Roman commanders didn't hesitate to accept. The trap Civilis set was absolutely diabolical. He arranged to meet the legions at a strategic point along the Rhine River, claiming he needed to coordinate their movements with other pro-Vespasian forces. The Roman commanders, still believing they were dealing with loyal allies, agreed to transport their forces by river to speed up the rendezvous. Here's where Civilis's intimate knowledge of Roman tactics became lethal. He knew exactly how Roman forces would organize such a river crossing. He knew which ships would carry the officers, where the cavalry would be positioned, and how the infantry would be distributed across the fleet. More importantly, he knew their greatest weakness. Roman soldiers, weighed down by heavy armor and equipment, couldn't swim. Picture the scene. A gray morning along the Rhine, with Roman transport ships moving slowly downstream. The soldiers are relaxed, chatting about the upcoming campaign, completely unaware that death is watching from both riverbanks. Batavian warriors, masters of aquatic warfare since childhood, are hidden in the reeds and marshes that line the river. Then Civilis springs his trap with devastating precision. Batavian swimmers, moving silently underwater, begin attacking the Roman ships from below. These weren't random attacks. This was coordinated naval warfare. The Batavians had developed techniques for boring holes in ship hulls, cutting anchor ropes, and even pulling individual soldiers overboard from beneath the water's surface. Simultaneously, Batavian archers on both banks unleash a devastating crossfire. The Romans find themselves trapped in the middle of the river with nowhere to run and no way to fight back effectively. Their ships are sinking, their formations are shattered, and their enemies are literally surrounding them in 3 dimensions: on land, on water, and underwater. The most horrific accounts describe Roman legionaries weighed down by 60 pounds of armor and equipment, disappearing beneath the dark waters of the Rhine. These were men who had conquered Britain, who had held the line against Germanic invasions, who had never known defeat. Now they were drowning like stones, their legendary discipline and training useless against an enemy who fought like river spirits. Some Romans tried to swim to shore in full armor. Others attempted to fight while treading water. A few managed to reach the riverbanks, only to find Batavian warriors waiting with spears and swords. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a massacre disguised as a battle. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Word spread like wildfire throughout the Germanic tribes. The invincible Roman legions had been destroyed by their own allies. Tribes that had remained neutral for generations suddenly saw opportunity where they had once seen only Roman strength. But here's a fact that will blow your mind. Even after this devastating betrayal, even after losing 2 entire legions to Batavian treachery, Rome never disbanded the Batavian auxiliary units. Think about that for a moment. The same people who had just inflicted one of the worst military disasters in Roman history were so valuable that the empire kept them in service. That's how elite these warriors were, and how much Rome needed their skills. If you're enjoying this incredible story of ancient warfare, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. Would you have supported a leader like Civilis, even against an seemingly invincible empire? The courage it took to challenge Rome was extraordinary, but was it heroism or madness? Share your thoughts below. Rome's response to the Batavian humiliation was swift, brutal, and absolutely terrifying. When news of the Legion Massacre reached the newly crowned Emperor Vespasian, his reaction was immediate. This rebellion would be crushed with such overwhelming force that no tribe would ever dare challenge Rome again. The man chosen to deliver this vengeance was Quintus Petilius Cerialis, one of Rome's most ruthless and experienced generals. Cerialis wasn't just any military commander. He was a specialist in what we might call pacification campaigns, the kind of warfare designed not just to win battles, but to break entire people's will to resist. He had already proven his effectiveness crushing rebellions in Britain, where he had turned Celtic warriors into broken refugees. But what truly made Rome's response terrifying was the sheer scale of the force Cerialis assembled. We're talking about 50,000 soldiers, the largest army Rome had deployed on the Germanic frontier in decades. To put this in perspective, this was larger than the force that conquered Britain, larger than most of Rome's eastern campaigns. This wasn't just military retaliation. This was imperial fury made manifest. The army Cerialis brought wasn't just big. It was diverse and specialized. He had veteran legions from Italy, Germanic auxiliaries who had remained loyal to Rome, Gallic cavalry units seeking to prove their continued allegiance, and even Syrian archers who could rain death from impossible distances. This was Rome's military machine at its most devastating, a multinational force united by one goal, the complete destruction of Batavian resistance. But here's what made this campaign truly revolutionary. Cerialis introduced military innovations that would change warfare forever. For the first time in recorded history, Roman cavalry rode into battle on armored horses. These weren't just leather coverings. We're talking about metal plates protecting the animals' heads, necks, and flanks. Imagine the psychological impact of these steel-clad war horses thundering toward you, their riders wielding long spears while the horses themselves became weapons. The decisive confrontation came at Trier, a strategic city that controlled access to multiple river valleys. Civilis had chosen this location carefully, hoping to use the terrain to offset Rome's numerical advantage. The Batavians and their Germanic allies occupied strong defensive positions on hills overlooking the city, forcing the Romans to attack uphill across open ground. What followed was one of antiquity's most desperate last stands. The Batavians, outnumbered nearly 5-1, fought with the fury of men who knew they faced annihilation. But here's the heartbreaking detail that really drives home their desperation. By this point in the campaign, many Batavian warriors were fighting with improvised weapons. Their swords had been broken, their spears shattered, their shields split. They were wielding farming tools, hunting knives, even sharpened stakes torn from their own fortifications. The battle itself was absolutely savage. Roman sources describe Germanic warriors continuing to fight even after losing limbs, mothers throwing stones at Roman soldiers while holding their children, elderly men charging Roman lines with nothing but wooden clubs. This wasn't just military resistance. This was an entire people choosing death over submission. Then Civilis unleashed his secret weapon, the armored cavalry charge. Picture this scene. Hundreds of steel-clad horses and riders forming up in perfect formation, their metal armor gleaming in the sunlight like some nightmare vision from another world. The sound alone must have been terrifying, the thunder of hooves multiplied by the clashing of metal plates. When these armored cavalry units hit the Batavian lines, the impact was devastating both physically and psychologically. Germanic warriors who had faced Roman infantry for years had never encountered anything like this. Their weapons, designed to fight men, were nearly useless against armored horses. Their traditional tactics, based on mobility and individual combat skill, collapsed against this new form of mechanized warfare. The breakthrough came when the armored cavalry punched through the center of the Batavian line, splitting their forces and allowing Roman infantry to pour through the gap. What had been an organized defense became a chaotic retreat, then a massacre, as Roman forces pursued fleeing warriors across the battlefield. But even in defeat, the Batavians proved their legendary courage. Rather than surrender, many warriors fought to the death where they stood. Others retreated to their sacred groves and burned themselves alive rather than face Roman slavery. It was the end of an era, the final chapter of an ancient people's independence, written in blood and fire on the hills around Trier. In the aftermath of their devastating defeat, the Batavians faced a choice that would define their future for centuries: total annihilation or negotiated submission. What followed was one of ancient history's most complex peace settlements, a mixture of pragmatic politics and brutal humiliation that reveals just how much Rome both feared and needed these Germanic warriors. The negotiations themselves were shrouded in mystery and intrigue. General Civilis, despite his overwhelming military victory, was surprisingly willing to talk rather than simply exterminate the remaining Batavians. Why? Because Rome had learned a harsh lesson from this rebellion. The empire literally couldn't function without Batavian military expertise. Even after their betrayal, even after the massacre of 2 legions, Rome needed these warriors too much to destroy them completely. But the most mysterious aspect of these peace talks was what happened to Civilis himself. The man who had orchestrated one of Rome's greatest military humiliations simply vanished from history at the moment of his defeat. Roman sources are strangely silent about his fate, offering only vague suggestions that he withdrew from public life after the negotiations. Some historians believe Civilis committed suicide in the ancient Germanic tradition, choosing death over the shame of submission. Others suggest he was secretly executed by Roman agents, his death covered up to prevent him from becoming a martyr. The most intriguing theory is that he was granted secret exile, allowed to disappear into the Germanic wilderness in exchange for his cooperation in ending the rebellion. What we do know is that his disappearance was as calculated as everything else he had done. By vanishing at the peak of the peace negotiations, Civilis denied Rome the satisfaction of parading him through the streets as a defeated enemy. He also prevented his people from being forever branded as followers of a traitor. In a sense, his mysterious exit was his final strategic masterstroke. The peace terms themselves were absolutely brutal, designed to ensure that the Batavians would never again pose a threat to Roman rule. First, they lost their cherished autonomy, the special status that had exempted them from Roman taxes for generations. Now they would pay tribute like any conquered province, their wealth flowing directly into Roman coffers. But the most humiliating condition was what Romans called taxation in blood. The Batavians were required to provide a continuous stream of warriors for Roman service, but now it wasn't voluntary military cooperation, it was forced conscription. Every Batavian family had to surrender their sons to Roman service, knowing they might never see them again. Even more degrading was the permanent garrison requirement. A full Roman legion would be stationed in Batavian territory forever, a constant reminder of their subjugation. These weren't just soldiers, they were occupying forces, living symbols of Roman dominance quartered in the very heartland that had once been free. Imagine the psychological impact on Batavian children growing up with Roman soldiers patrolling their villages, Roman officers commanding their brothers, Roman taxes draining their families' wealth. The rebellion had failed so completely that it seemed to have crushed the Batavian spirit forever. But here's where this story takes an absolutely incredible turn, one that reveals the complex relationship between conqueror and conquered in the Roman world. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the bloodshed, despite the humiliating peace terms, Batavian military prowess remained legendary throughout the empire. Centuries later, long after the original rebels were dead and buried, their descendants achieved something that would have been unthinkable to Civilis and his warriors. They became the ultimate insiders in Roman society. Batavian soldiers didn't just serve in Roman armies, they became the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal bodyguards, the most elite and trusted military unit in the entire empire. Think about the incredible irony of this transformation. The grandsons and great-grandsons of warriors who had tried to destroy Rome were now literally sleeping outside the emperor's bedroom, trusted with the most sensitive state secrets, wielding life-and-death power over the empire's most important decisions. This wasn't just military service, it was the ultimate integration. Batavian officers married into Roman noble families, Batavian soldiers retired to comfortable estates throughout the empire, Batavian names appeared on imperial inscriptions and monuments. The people who had once burned Roman fortresses were now building them, yet this success came at an enormous cost. In gaining Roman acceptance, the Batavians lost their cultural identity. Their language disappeared. Their religious traditions were absorbed into Roman practices. Their tribal structures dissolved into imperial bureaucracy. They had become Romans, but in doing so, they ceased to be Batavians. The final chapter of this transformation is perhaps the most poignant. By the 4th century after Christ, when barbarian invasions were tearing the Western Roman Empire apart, it was Batavian descendants in the Praetorian Guard who made the last desperate attempts to preserve Roman civilization. The people whose ancestors had tried to destroy Rome were now dying to save it. So what do we make of this incredible story? Was the Batavian Revolt a glorious failure or a tragic mistake? Did Civilis achieve anything lasting, or did his rebellion simply accelerate his people's absorption into the Roman world? The Batavian Revolt was a cry for freedom that was ultimately silenced, but it was also something more profound, a warning that echoed through the corridors of Roman power for centuries. No empire, no matter how mighty, no matter how seemingly invincible, is beyond the reach of determined resistance. Even Rome, at the height of its power, could be brought to its knees by people who refuse to accept their chains. Today, if you travel through the Dutch province of Gelderland, you're walking through the homeland of these ancient warriors. Modern archaeologists working in the waterlogged soils along the Rhine continue to uncover the physical evidence of this forgotten war. Broken swords, still sharp enough to cut, corroded armor plates that once protected Roman chests, and most haunting of all, human bones that tell silent stories of that final, desperate battle. These archaeological discoveries aren't just academic curiosities. They're tangible connections to people who faced impossible choices 2,000 years ago. Every rusted spearhead represents a moment when someone decided to fight rather than submit. Every fragment of burned wood from a Roman fortress speaks to the night when Batavian warriors chose rebellion over security. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery isn't made of metal or bone. It's the realization that the Batavian story isn't really about ancient history at all. It's about the eternal human struggle between freedom and security, between the courage to resist and the wisdom to survive. Think about Civilis himself, standing at that crucial moment when he had to choose between his oath to Rome and his loyalty to his people. He had everything to lose: his career, his status, his family's safety, his very life. He could have stayed quiet, kept his head down, and lived comfortably as a Roman citizen. Instead, he chose to become an enemy of the most powerful empire in history. Was he a hero or a fool? That depends entirely on what you value more, the certainty of survival under foreign rule or the slim hope of dying free. It's a choice that people have faced in every generation since, and one that defines not just individuals, but entire civilizations. What makes the Batavian story so compelling is that there are no easy answers. Civilis' rebellion failed militarily, but it succeeded in proving that Rome could bleed. His people lost their independence, but their descendants gained access to the highest levels of Roman society. The revolt was crushed, but the memory of resistance lived on to inspire future generations. History isn't made of simple moral lessons or clear-cut victories. It's built from the accumulated weight of individual choices, each one echoing forward through time in ways the original actors could never imagine. When Civilis drew his sword against Rome, he couldn't have known that his great-great-grandsons would one day guard Roman emperors. When Roman soldiers crossed the Rhine to crush the rebellion, they couldn't have foreseen that Batavian loyalty would eventually become legendary throughout the empire. The real lesson of the Batavian Revolt isn't about the futility of resistance or the inevitability of Roman victory. It's about the complexity of human choice and the unpredictability of historical consequence. Sometimes fighting and losing achieves more than never fighting at all. Sometimes the greatest victories come disguised as defeats, and sometimes the most important battles are fought not for immediate results, but for the right to say, "We tried." So here's the question that every person who learns this story must answer for themselves. What would you have done in Civilis' place? Would you have chosen the rebellion that might fail, or the submission that promised survival? Would you have fought until death for your people's freedom, or accepted foreign rule for your family's safety? There's no right answer, because history doesn't offer right answers. It only offers choices, and the knowledge that every choice we make echoes forward through time in ways we can never fully understand. If this incredible story has made you think, if it's challenged your assumptions about power and resistance, about loyalty and betrayal, then hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you have stood with Civilis against impossible odds? Do you think his rebellion was worth the cost? What does this ancient struggle teach us about our own times? Don't forget to subscribe to Imperium Chronicles for more forgotten stories from the ancient world. We're here to uncover the human dramas behind the history books, to explore the choices that shaped our world, and to discover that the past isn't really past at all. It's still speaking to us, if we know how to listen. Until our next journey into the shadows of history, remember that every empire eventually falls, every rebellion eventually ends, but the courage to stand up for what you believe in, that's eternal. See you in the next battle.